Chad. I am a chemical engineering PhD student. That's what I do, not who I am. And I am a gay Mormon, and I'm married to Jenni.
And I'm Jenni Curtis, and we've been married for almost 3 years. I received a degree in social studies education from BYU, Idaho. I taught middle school for 4 years, and now I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I enjoy taking care of our little 6-month-old baby.
And she does a great job. We have been married for 3 years, almost 3 years, we're getting there. But to start off our story, it starts a little earlier. You know, we want to tell how we met, and also how I came to even consider being in a marriage, and I thought that'd be a naturally good place to perhaps not begin. I need to go to the very beginning, right? Really? So both of us, we were raised in really strong Mormon households. We perhaps didn't hold family home evening every single week, but we read our scriptures. We were familiar with all the stories in the Book of Mormon. And I grew up in Utah, in Salt Lake City area, and my family was really active, but we weren't afraid to do things that perhaps were like, we would take Sunday off to go camping in the mountains all the time. So I grew up with I really appreciated the outdoors, and I didn't have a Pharisaical approach to a lot of the commandments. Like, I was willing to, if Sunday was family time in addition to going to church. And that's an interesting part of our story too, is constantly how, like, I thought coming to terms with SSA would be separate from my conversion story, but I always had a testimony, but both of them are kind of interwoven. That's kind of cool, but I guess everyone experiences that. You always grow through those kind of experiences. Growing up and going to high school, I in a lot of people's stories that I've heard and listened to, some people knew always that they were attracted to men, or that was a part of their experience. But for me, I couldn't see that immediately. I had fun dating girls. I asked girls out to every dance that came, in the fun, creative Utah way, where you have to leave a surprise on their doorstep. Or one time I actually got our next door neighbor, who was a policeman, to go and arrest the girl I was going to go on a date with when I was waiting in the police car with flowers. It's a fun part of but that kind of creates some distance too. Dating was more of a fun thing, getting to know people. And I did see people around me who did start to date girls seriously, but I always didn't know how that was supposed to happen, or how you could even be, I didn't see how that was a thing. Like, even holding hands was like a mystery to me. I didn't know how you were supposed to get to that point, or like, is there a book that gives the rules of engagement with these kind of things? But in my interactions with guys and guy friends, I didn't ever call it an attraction to me. Inside, I said that I admired them. But there were lots of guys that I admired. Those are people that I wanted to be like, and that I wanted to be friends with. But I would always find myself wanting to try to sit with them at lunch, or getting giddy when I was around them, or being at a loss of words. But I figured everyone felt like that. That must be a normal thing.
I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, and there weren't a lot of Mormons in my high school. I grew up in a very LDS family, and we never really talked about people who were gay, and it just wasn't brought up. But we all knew the teachings of the church, that marriage was between a man and a woman and things like that. And I remember in high school, there was this girl, And these other girls told me that this girl had a crush on me. And that it freaked me out a little bit because I wasn't comfortable with that, right? I'd never experienced anyone who was lesbian or who was gay or anything like that. And so it kind of freaked me out. And because I was uncomfortable, I found it was easier to kind of push it aside, to avoid it as much as possible. And that kind of became my philosophy with dealing with uncomfortable things in general, but also especially with that, was to avoid it. And that was kind of where I left off with it up until pretty much until I met Chad. So
when I was starting to prepare to go on my mission, I was working at Barnes & Noble. Everyone else would kind of make fun of me as being the naive little Mormon boy. I would comment if someone got a tattoo or if they'd offer me coffee or things like that. And it was just kind of fun. But one day, one of my coworkers introduced me to one of his friends. These guys were a lot older than me, but I was super excited because I wasn't quick at making friends, so anything that I felt like included. I felt part of the group. And they invited me, this new acquaintance of mine invited me to his house. He started talking to me through messaging. We exchanged phone numbers, and I started a really awesome conversations. But some of the things that he started to bring up were really weird, odd, personal questions that I had never been asked before. I just kind of ignored it and assumed he was just an interesting person. So we started, he asked me if I could pick him up after work and we'd go over to his house. And I said, sure. So we I went and picked him up and we started driving, and he immediately awkwardly placed his hand on my leg. So I just kind of ignored it and tried to make conversation, but he never went in very much depth. Like he didn't want to talk really. But when we got to his house, I kept trying to engage him in conversation, but he immediately started undoing my belt. And I got super freaked out, and I kind of froze. I didn't know what to do. And he ended up sexually abusing me. And the thing that made it really hard for me was the fact that I didn't do anything. Like I didn't fight back as I thought I was supposed to. So I took away that I was guilty, that I had committed the unforgivable sin. His roommate eventually came home, and I was able to slip out of the room, and I ran back to my car and drove home. And I immediately went to my parents. I was really broken up. And my parents, the things that they said, they made me more worried. Like my dad, he was worried that I wouldn't be able to go on my mission or that it would be postponed. And I was under the impression that I was going to be excommunicated. I was super nervous that I wasn't going to be able to be a normal member. And my mom was like wanting to call the police, and she threatened the guy who had done that. But that was the last thing I wanted to do. I didn't want to draw attention to it. I just wanted it to go away. So we scheduled an appointment with the bishop. After I had told my story to him, he told me that I didn't have anything to be forgiven about because I hadn't done anything. That totally caught me off guard. I didn't think that I had to have some way to resolve this. Like I had to do something. And I felt like I was still I walked out of the office feeling not totally at peace with myself, but I didn't know how to fix it or what I needed to do. My bishop did ask me to go visit a therapist, but I didn't open up. That just made me more nervous, like going to a psychologist. So I didn't want to have to talk about it again, especially with someone I didn't know. And so I just kind of bottled it up, and I figured that, if I was clear to go on my mission, I'd go on my mission and I'd see how it went from there.
So I served a mission in Anaheim, California, and After I got home, I started going on, dates and things, but I always had a hard time getting close to guys, and it was difficult. I began to see like my friends get married, and then my roommates who were younger than me, they got married. Everyone was getting married, and I wasn't, and that was kind of difficult, and I became a little bitter, and I had to really think about like, what did I personally believe that romance and love was and what it looked like, because it wasn't happening for me the way the movies showed it, and I always kind of held myself back from relationships because I'd always see these different issues. I always told myself, I don't want to blind myself to a guy's true faults and things like that. I don't want to be that person, because as I was going to college and things, I was working with these women who would tell me these stories and about these men that they had fallen in love with. They thought he was like the perfect man, and they would fall in love with him, and they got married. And then after they got married, it was like this whole other side to these men came out, and they would, use them and abuse them, and eventually they would leave them. And that really put a caution in me. Eventually, I wasn't really having these relationships with guys because I kept holding myself back. And then one day I was praying and thinking about, why do I have a hard time getting close to guys? Why do I have a hard time with these relationships? And I had this thought that if all of these things are deal breakers for you, then what is something that you are willing to accept into your life, in someone else? And I couldn't think of one thing. I couldn't think of one issue, one challenge, anything that I could accept. And at that point, I realized that the problem wasn't with these guys that I was dating. The problem was with me, and that I was the one who needed to change so that I could accept someone into my life and love them and have a good and healthy relationship with them.
I served a mission in Frankfurt, Germany. It was a spiritual high. Like, that's what missions are supposed to be, right? And I loved every minute of it. I had the chance to feel the Spirit work in me and to feel like I had spiritual power. And that was the sign. I took that as a sign that I was worthy. That the scripture that they use as missionaries all the time is, if ye have not the Spirit, ye shall not teach. So I kind of used it in the backward sense. Well, I'm teaching, and I'm teaching well, so I must have the Spirit. But I did. I felt I was so glad to be able to learn how to recognize the Spirit, and that served throughout the rest of my life. I always knew when I had found something good and something that I wanted to have in my life. I also had the chance to work with great leaders who helped me. I never talked to my priesthood leader about that experience of sexual abuse, but I did talk to him all the time about my goals and my spiritual experiences that I had. On my exit interview, my mission president asked me, of course, the question that you're always going to get asked, well, Elder, now that your mission is done, what is your purpose now? And well, I knew what he was leading into. I was like, well, the next step after your mission, well, I got to find my wife, right? And he was like, yes, Elder, you're still finding. And I took that to heart. I came home and I did just that. I started trying to find dates. They didn't have like any key indicators or anything for how many dates you went on, but I got pretty close to that level of intensity. But as I was dating, I started to recognize that things weren't working the way I thought they would be. I would have to find creative ways to, I didn't even know how to hold a girl's hand, so I would try to come up with creative ways to do that. I was like, well, if it's a cold night, I can be like, do you need a hand warmer? And so I'd be perhaps it'd be super awkward, but I needed to find something to do. So I probably wasn't the best at dating. But I started to think about that as an option. I started to ask this question, well, I even used the word in my mind, am I gay? But that I knew that couldn't be, because that wasn't me. I had grown up my whole life thinking that being gay was not in congruence with the gospel. My parents had taught me that gays were, there were people at BYU trying to get you who were gay, and that seemed, my parents were very, very conservative, and so I grew up with that very conservative view as well. So I knew that couldn't be it. But I ended up having a chance of fate that was very, very, very important. I got an internship at a pharmaceutical company, and one of my fellow interns that I was working with, she was an awesome girl. I was thinking about adding her to my people who I should perhaps ask out on a date. But she'd keep talking about her girlfriend in the singular, and I found that very curious. I had assumed maybe she was talking about a particular girlfriend that she liked to hang out with on a regular basis. But the more I talked about it, the more I realized that she was dating, and that I was like, whoa, what? But you went on she was a very spiritual person. She had gone on a mission. These things were totally conflicting my worldview. I was blown away. So I started talking to her more and figuring out her experience and how she had brought both of these pieces together in her life. And she was in her own story and her own, she had her own experiences, but I began to learn from her, and I also started considering telling her about my own experiences. And I did. One day I decided to, the first time I'd ever come out to anyone, I told her that I thought that I was attracted to men. And she was so understanding. It was awesome. She talked me through the process. She talked me through, she made me know that I wasn't like any less or anything. She also invited me to go to a support group to feel a feeling of welcome. And she also helped me. The first thing I wanted to do was how do I tell my parents? When I went to tell my mom and dad, I probably didn't do it in the most tactful way or in the most prepared way. I hadn't even come to terms with it myself. I just wanted them to know, because I wanted to work it together with my parents. I thought that's the best thing that I could do. And so with little preparation, I found a time when my mom and dad were in their bedroom together, and I went to talk to them, and I tried to break it to them slowly. I said, "Hey, Mom and Dad, I don't think I like girls." And my mom and dad were like, "Well, that's okay. I didn't know I didn't like the first guy that I met either." And I was like, "Well, yeah, but I think it's a little different. I used the term, I think I'm gay." And my dad was the one who talked first. There was a bit of a silence. And my dad, the first thing he asked was whether I still had a testimony. And in the moment, that didn't seem very helpful. I guess that's putting it lightly. For me in the moment, that seemed like he was questioning my faith. Like I had just gone on a mission. I had been having all these spiritual experiences. I felt like my faith was an important part of me, and I felt like that devalued my own testimony. And looking back, I've been able to understand now where my dad was coming from. I know that my dad was very worried about me. He wanted to know, talking with him later, he just wanted to know he knew that having faith would carry me through anything. And I'm really glad I understand that now, but it hurt at the moment. My mom too, struggled even more than my dad. my mom, the first thing she said was, well, I wish you hadn't told me at all. And that hurt. And I left the room, and I chose not to tell them anymore what was going on in my life. I decided to cut them off. I didn't talk about it with them anymore. And I think that hurt me in the long run. I didn't have my parents as a supporter, someone I could talk to, and part of it was my own fault. I chose not to confide in them anymore. That probably put me on a bad trajectory. I ended up going to this support group with this friend of mine from work, and it wasn't the most positive support. Well, I don't know. It was a very helpful support group for what it was. We met down in Provo, but it wasn't aligned with church teachings necessarily. It was you're Mormon and you're gay, whatever your beliefs or whatever your position is, you can come and you'll feel welcome. And that surprised me. I'd never met gays and Mormons first. This was like a community. Like, I didn't know there was so many people. But there were so many people who had made different choices. There were people who were remaining celibate and who wanted to remain in the church. There were people who were married to people of the opposite gender. But there were people who also had successful same-sex marriages and relationships. There were people who were actively dating. For me, it was a mess. Like, I didn't know, oh my gosh, like there's so much, what am I supposed to do? So I started attending these weekly meetings, trying to resolve how I felt. Like, is there there's no longer one path that I'm supposed to take, or what path am I supposed to take? I didn't know what way to go. And I just kind of put it on the back shelf. I was like, I'm going to keep going to church. I'm going to keep going to these meetings, but I don't know what way I'm going to go. I didn't have a solid, I didn't have a path figured out yet. I met a guy in our carpool, and I started actively dating. I dated him and a couple other guys too. And it was fun. I ended up learning things I didn't know that I could have done. Like, holding hands with girls was totally awkward. I had to come up with creative ways to hold a girl's hand. But now whenever I held a guy's hand, it came so naturally. Like, it just happened without me even having to think. When I was dating, the first thing we did was he took me out to a cafe and we started talking. He was a Mormon as well. Well, he had left the church, and he was totally fine dating guys, and that was new to me. And I told him where I was coming from, that I had served a mission. I wanted to stay in the church. I didn't know if I would be able to get married, but I wanted to have the church as a part of my life. And so we started dating, but very cautiously, and introduced this level of secrecy in my life that I had never had before, where I would go out on dates and I'd come home and have to have some excuse to my parents what I was doing. The tipping point with this experience was I invited him to a conference that I was going to on the East Coast for school. And I felt like I was moving the relationship to the next level. That was kind of scary, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I did it. We went and we spent a week together in having an adventure. It was totally fun, but I started breaking some boundaries that I didn't know that I would have done. I felt like I was choosing a path. Like, I was going to solidify, the path I chose, I wouldn't be able to change anymore. That I would be no longer to be able to be in that gray region. And it scared me. And so I had this moment, this epiphany, where I knew that I had to act. This was, if I wanted to have the church in my life, I would have to end this relationship. And I did that. At that night, I told him that I didn't want to continue what we were doing, and that I wanted things to go back to normal when we got home. But I came home, and I wanted to set things straight. So the first thing I did, I was still very scared to talk to my bishop. So what I did was I wrote a letter, and in it I told him everything that I had done, and everything that I wanted to do. I made a list when I came into the bishop of 6 goals that I wanted to fulfill with, and where I wanted to be, where I wanted to aim to be. And my bishop, I was surprised at how understanding he was, because the first thing I thought, I got my temple recommend ready to hand over to him, but he didn't ask for it, and he didn't do anything about that. He just sat down and talked. We didn't even talk about guilt, or we didn't talk about the law of chastity. We just talked about what it was like being gay. I started meeting with him on a regular basis. We continued to have conversations, and I felt like he trusted me. I never had any disciplinary action taken, and in fact, he asked me eventually if I would be a temple worker. And I began working in the temple and feeling a level of, working in the temple is so cool because you internalize the covenants that you made, and they became really a part of me. Eventually, my bishop, we got a new bishop, the bishop that eventually Jenni and I worked with when we were getting married. He was also very helpful. When I came out to him, the first thing he asked me, he was a totally new bishop, never been bishop before, and he just asked me, well, teach me. And that was so helpful. Like, I was the one who set the pace. I didn't feel any level of judgment, and I felt able to talk freely that I didn't have anyone to talk about this with. It was so nice to have someone who didn't experience what it was like having same-sex attraction, but someone who was working at it with me and learning kind of at my same pace. One analogy that I did find that really helped me was in Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I'm a big fan of C.S. Lewis. And in his chapter on Christian marriage, one of the things he says is he differentiates between falling in love and love. He uses an analogy of gunpowder that falling in love is the spark that starts the flame, but love itself is the thing that keeps the flame going, the long-term thing. So I just figured that I had to start a fire without a spark. That's how I approached it. That was my analogy that I used as I started to date. I tried to get to know the girls that I was dating. And I didn't actually date too many before I met Jenni. And the first time I had met her, she'd borne her testimony. And I saw her on a regular basis, and I knew that she was a spiritual person. And I did have a hard time talking to her because we were both a little shy, but I did end up we ended up meeting officially at a baptism where she gave me a piece of smushed cake or pizza. We can't even remember anymore what it was, but she gave me some food.
It was some sort of food. I've been sitting in my car all day.
I ended up talking to her again and asking her on a date. I wasn't very smooth at it. I asked her out to dinner, and then I think our first date, we went to Barnes & Noble. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I took you to Barnes & Noble. And I actually read to you that quote from C.S. Lewis in that book about marriage.
I tried not to read too much into it.
She forgave me, and we ended up We ended up going on a date every single Friday night. I didn't know how to I didn't know how to date, so I thought every Friday night was what you're supposed to do. That's what you're doing when you're dating. After we had a certain level of awkwardness, I thought the relationship had failed, so I stopped asking her out for a time. We had about a period of 5 months where I stopped asking her out. You know, singles wards are all about getting you to date, and they gave a whole sacrament meeting on dating and marriage, which got everyone super motivated. And I ended up,
including Chad,
including me. I was like, well, maybe I could try one more time. So Jenni was in the hall, and I just let it slip out, even though we hadn't talked in a long time. I was like, so do you want to go on another date? And Jenni said yes. And so we did it all again. We did the whole awkward date one more time. And after the date, I asked her out again, right?
Well, yeah.
But then Jenni wasn't going for that anymore. She wasn't going to go for the whole, oh, we're not doing this again. We're not going down this road again.
So at some point, Chad had put on Facebook, on his about section, he wrote this super long about section. I'm sorry, I'm the only one who has read it to this day because it's so long. And at the very end, he put something in there about, I'm gay, and it kind of threw me for a loop for a while, but I've kind of got my feet back and things like that. And I read that and I was like, wait, what? And, kind of read it again. And I was kind of glad that that relationship had kind of puttered out. Because I thought, oh, that's something I can't handle. After my experience, where I realized that, I was the one who really needed to change, I had to kind of sit down with myself and think of all the guys I had dated. And I realized that the person that I most regretted not following up in the relationship was Chad. And so that kind of created this conflict, right? So I decided at the time to set that issue kind of to the side, knowing that we'd have to deal with it at some point. But I wanted to get to know Chad for himself, right? I wanted to it was to work on myself and accepting people for who they are. And so I chose to, go on dates with Chad again and to start building that relationship up, knowing that eventually we're going to have to discuss this other issue.
She pretty much said, hey, I like going on dates with you, but I'm looking for a serious relationship. I want to find a relationship that I can that can potentially where we can get married. And if you're dating just to have fun, then you probably shouldn't ask me out again. But if you want to have a serious relationship, I'd love to have you to go on another date with you. And to me, it didn't come off as an ultimatum. I was like, that means she wants to date me. Like, this is what I was waiting for. Like, this is the next step. This is define your relationship moment kind of thing. And so I felt like things were working, and we ended up becoming pretty official, right? We were officially dating for real. But eventually, the time came where Jenni alluded to, where we're going to have to talk about being gay.
So I was kind of waiting for Chad to bring it up. I was hoping Chad would bring it up. But the longer we would date and we never talked about it, the more it felt like, to me, like the elephant in the room, right? It was there. We needed to talk about it. We weren't talking about it. And so that was getting difficult. And I finally got to the point where I was like, we're just going to have to talk about it because we're getting more serious. I'm starting to have feelings for Chad, and we'd been dating for several months, and we need to talk about this. And so I finally brought it brought it up. He was over at my apartment, and I just kind of brought it up. I had a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, and a lot of fears about what it would mean to not just have a serious relationship, but if it eventually got to marriage, what would it be like marrying a gay man? And I had some questions I had already thought about in my head that I was going to ask, that I needed answers to, and I had decided if Chad's answers weren't sufficient for me, I don't know, they would be deal breakers. They would be reasons to not go on with the relationship. And so some questions I wanted to ask was like, well, have you ever, acted on your feelings, on your same sex attraction feelings, and are you attracted to girls at all? Because I had a friend who mentioned that maybe it was like a spectrum or something like that, and so I was gonna, are you attracted to girls at all, or are you attracted to me, which is even more important. And so I was concerned about how if this progressed to marriage, how a physical, intimate relationship could work out, how it could be successful, if it could be successful. And so I ended up talking about it with Chad, and it was really tense.
Yeah, it was, and you could tell. I tried to be I was honest as I could. I told her everything. I tried to tell her my story in as much detail as I could, and to address some of her questions, some of the biggest ones was, well, am I attracted to women? And I think she got the feeling that I was giving her all the wrong answers.
No, I asked the question and you said no.
I said no.
So he gave me his answers. Yes, he had acted on his same sex attraction, and but he had repented. No, he wasn't attracted to girls. He was attracted to guys, and he didn't know how an intimate relationship would work out, but he hoped it could.
That was. I wanted to be clear that I didn't have any guarantees. I wanted to make the relationship with Jenni work, but I didn't know how it was going to work. I was committed. I wanted to pursue a relationship with Jenni and perhaps eventually even get married to Jenni, but I didn't know how. So what I told her was, I feel that this is something I want to do. This is something I'm committed to. But the only thing I can tell you right now is that I can only rely on God. And that's what I told her, and I hope I got through.
So, with that discussion, I had some experience, because to me, all of the answers to his questions had kind of reached that preset deal breaker status. I'm like, oh, well, okay, what am I going to do now? But Chad had also given me some resources to consider, and one of them was Ty Mansfield's book, In Quiet Desperation, and so I read that book and found that there were things in there that I could relate to, that even though, I didn't experience the same thing as Chad, that there were things in my life that I could only overcome through the help of my Savior. And I felt like I could really connect with that when Ty talked about that in his book. And so that helped lay a groundwork for understanding Chad and what he was going through. And another thing that I was doing at the time, I joined a class called, I think it was called A Walk with Christ, and they were doing it in our ward, and it was just volunteer, and you could go there and in the evening, and they had scriptures to read and a little journal for your thoughts and things. And I joined it with the intent of working on myself, on changing myself. I wanted to overcome some of my own struggles, my own weaknesses, and I wanted to also see if I could come to the right conclusion on what I should do with my relationship with Chad. I really wanted to accept him and see him for who he was. So as I went to that class, I did a lot of journal writing and a lot of studying, a lot of thinking. I found that as I relied on my Savior and as I prayed and studied, that I was able to change some of my preconceptions about what it meant for someone to be gay, but also I was able to see Chad as more than just a gay man. I could see him as someone who loved the church, and that his desires to be married in the temple and to have a family and to have a relationship in the church was just as legit as any other person. That was a part of him, just as much as anything else was a part of him. And that helped me to realize that our goals could align and that we could love each other, and that kind of opened that door to that acceptance that helped to build that love.
The thing that moved us forward after that, the thing that I really wanted Jenni to know was that this was possible. And I had a really good friend who was farther along the path than I was. He had a beautiful wife and he had 4 kids. And I'd met him at a group that was run through a stake with someone who was called through the ward, and that he led that group. And I trusted him a lot, and I knew that it would be really good for Jenni particularly to hear from not someone who experienced same-sex attraction, but from a wife of someone. I introduced Jenni to them, and we set up an appointment where we'd be able to meet together and to talk.
Right. So yeah, one of my fears was, you always hear people talking about how mixed orientation marriages, they don't work, and they love to quote their statistics and things, and so I began to wonder as part of our relationship would this really work? I don't know anyone who's in a mixed orientation marriage, so I mean, how does that work? Does it work? I didn't even know. And so Chad introduced me to this couple who they were married and had kids, and we went to their home, and he introduced me to them, and it was really helpful for me to see, their beautiful home and their beautiful family, and to talk with them, to especially talk with the wife, and to hear, some of the things she went through and some of her concerns and how she resolved those concerns. Really, really helped me, because I felt kind of alone, that I knew, Chad wanted me to meet this family, but I was feeling like, is there someone in my situation, not as I didn't want to talk necessarily to someone who was gay, but to the wife of someone who was gay, because I didn't know if there's anyone who knew what I was going through as far as my fears and my concerns in being in a mixed orientation relationship. And it was really helpful to hear her side of the story and some of the things she went through. And one of the things she said that really helped me a lot was that, you know, every marriage has struggles or things, you know, that they go through that are hard and difficult. And when you look at other couples and you hear about their struggles and things, you want to keep your own struggles. You want to keep your own things that you go through, not because they're better or worse than anyone else's, but because you're familiar with them. And that really helped me a lot, to see that, you know, as you go through things, you learn how to find ways to make things work and to be happy in that relationship. And that really helped me a lot.
And that really got things moving. We talked a lot. We definitely talked a lot about it before. Another thing we did, we got a list of like 500 questions that you should ask each other before you get married, right? We started talking about it as a real option. Jenni and I were very careful and perhaps planned it. Well, you know, like when we started talking about marriage, we knew that was going to. It wasn't a surprise for either of us, right? There was no surprise. I pulled out a ring on you or anything. It was already been in the works a long time. But one day I took her to the Jordan River Parkway, right? And I told you that I love you. And I proposed to you, right?
Yeah. And it was great. And I, you know, told him that I loved him, and I, you know, I did. I had worked through a lot of the things that I was struggling with, but I had also gotten to know Chad for who he was, and I loved him for who he was. And so I wanted to get married to him.
We had a lot of fun with it too. One thing I insisted on was I wanted to do one of those YouTube videos where you surprise your spouse. And she didn't know about it. She didn't know that I was going to do this, but I ended up getting like all the people that I knew from my singles ward, and we did the Frozen song. We did a Frozen song musical proposal, and it was
fun.
It was super fun, right? So that was just for fun though, right? We started doing all the little things. We got a ring, and we planned our wedding together, and we ended up getting married in the Bountiful Temple on July 7th. Oh crud, did I say that wrong? No, July 11th.
July 11th.
7-Eleven, July 11th, 2014. It's easy to remember because it's 7-Eleven.
Yeah, free slushies.
For our wedding. And I think one of the neatest moments for me was when you're on your wedding day, it's super, super busy, right? Like, and it's hard to find a moment of quiet, really. But they give you some time to sit in the celestial room. And I was still feeling super, but I was still feeling super overwhelmed, but a lot of the busy was gone. And we were able to just sit in quiet and to think. And I felt such a feeling of peace that what we were doing was right. And I knew that it was going to work out. And it did. It did. We had some struggles along the way, especially in the first week, and then the first year. One of the hardest things for us, and that was hard up to about just a year ago, was talking about it. Talking about, now that we're married, whenever we talked about being gay, it had the assumption, at least in my mind, that something was going wrong. That, yeah, we're married, but if she's worried about something like, oh, well, you're not, I don't feel close enough to you, then it must be something wrong on my side. And so that did create some distance sometimes between us that was hard to resolve.
And for me, not talking about it meant something was wrong. And so I'd want to talk about it, but I wouldn't know what to say because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. And it just felt, and I kind of got from Chad that he didn't want to talk about it. And so talking about it felt like walking on a tightrope, you know. You don't know what to say. If you say the wrong thing, you're gonna fall off the rope. And so it was very tentative, and I was having some struggles at the time, and with a lot of questions still that I had, just the newness of marriage, but also being married to a gay man. I had a lot of insecurities about how things were going and things like that, and I worried that my husband wouldn't want me, in a physical sense, and that I wasn't meeting his needs. I worried about that he would leave me, things like that, and it made it really hard. And I didn't know how to express these things to him, and so I'd write him these letters, and I didn't know what was going on at the time, and so they were just kind of, I don't know, they were kind of just there, but not really helpful at all.
I knew that Jenni was hurting because it expressed that, but a lot of times it made me feel like I wasn't doing what I was supposed to, that I was somehow not fulfilling my role as husband in the relationship. I felt like I was failing, like something was going wrong, even though I was trying to do everything right. And we had one moment where she gave me this letter, and one of these letters, and I read it, and I broke down in tears. And my wife was very, I told her how I felt about it, that I wanted to, that I was doing everything I could, not only that I was trying, but that I wanted to reassure her in any way I could that I loved her, and I didn't know how to tell her that I'm not just saying it, I really do. And I was doing, that was a cathartic experience for us. Jenni knew after that I did love her, and that things were going well.
Yeah.
It still took us a while to get to the point where we could talk about it.
For me, I had to come to a conclusion that I could either kind of remain in my insecurities or I could choose to trust my husband. And I didn't want to tell him that I didn't trust him, because how do you tell your husband that you don't trust him, right? And I had to come to the conclusion that, I can't control Chad, but I can choose to trust him, and I can, because I love him. And if I kept going down this path of my own insecurities, I would tear our relationship apart, our budding marriage apart over silly what if questions. And so I chose, each day to trust him, to trust that he would be true to our covenant and true to me, and I knew that I loved him. I knew he loved me, and so I had to make that choice. And each day that I made that choice, it became a little easier to not worry so much. And eventually those worries either went away, or we got to the point where we were able to talk about them and work them out. And that was that was really helpful. So, yeah.
And I think one of the things that did help, well, a couple things. One, we moved to Washington and to go to graduate school. And that was totally nice to get away from the Utah bubble. But we started making friends together. Like, that was so nice to build things from the ground up together in a new place. And we eventually decided to share that with not just with our family, but we started writing a blog post about our experience. We wanted to detail this, to remember it for ourselves and to talk through it together. And that was really something powerful, to talk about both sides of our story. Some of the things we hadn't even told each other at the time. So we learned things from each other writing it. And it was really powerful to write that. And when we did write it and we shared it with, when we hit publish, we started getting comments from people we didn't know and from people we did know, and not in the most positive way.
Well, some were good.
Some were very positive.
Most were very
positive, actually.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. The overwhelming majority were positive.
But some were not so.
And sometimes from angles that we didn't expect. One, we didn't tell our parents that we were going to do that. So it came off as a surprise to our family and our extended family and my home ward. What happened, eventually I got a call from my mom saying that she had learned that we had openly come out on Facebook that I was gay, and she had heard it through my aunt, that we hadn't, not through me. And she was very hurt that we hadn't told her first. And then she went on and detailed how she'd gone to church and people were coming up to her and saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And they even had several people send flowers
and condolences
to my parents.
Yeah. And when I heard that, I was a little upset because, sending flowers to someone is something you do when someone dies. And that basically kind of conveyed the message that is the same, Chad being gay is the same as him being dead. And so that was kind of...
Especially since we had made it clear in our story, hey, we're married and we're expecting a kid, So that was a hard time to work through, but it ultimately ended up being a really good thing for me and my parents. I ended up talking a lot more to my parents. It's still not in a place I want it to be. Like, my parents don't like me to bring up the topic about me being gay at all. They just like to see happy relationship, happy baby, and that keeps them happy. But it's a work in progress, and I'm really glad that I've been able to talk to my parents and that I have a close relationship with them, and that I've been able to maintain that. And that pretty much brings us to the present day, where we are now. We keep having more experiences. We just went to our first North Star conference where we were able to, I think the biggest takeaway for us was how we can help build a community that supports LGBT saints where we are. And we're looking forward to continuing to do that and to hopefully help people be a support to those around them, regardless of where they come from or what their background is. I really like the scripture in Ether 12 where it says, "Hope is the anchor that lets you hope for a better world." That, to me, that scripture right there says that you don't have to be in the better world now. And so even if you're in a stage where you don't have everything together, you don't feel like everything's not going the way it should be, or that you don't have a perfect, you don't feel like things are perfect, that you can get there, that the Savior is going to support you, and that he is going to be there as a friend and as a guide and as a help. Part of that better world is there's going to be people there who can help you along the way. It's so important to have people that you're able to talk to and to share with. That has been such a powerful thing in my experience, is finding fellow saints that want me to be the best that I can be, and that I can also help and strengthen. I have my wife, but I also have many friends in the North Star community who have been there for me, and that I'm able to talk to and relate to. I am so grateful that the Savior instructed us to mourn with those that mourn and comfort those that stand in need of comfort. He didn't leave us alone. And that, I think, that's the thing that gives me hope, is the sense of belonging and the sense that the Savior is going to help me get there. He doesn't expect me to be there. The gospel is all about becoming, and we're all in that process. We're never going to stop becoming.
Well, I feel like I started, this journey thinking that, there were certain things in my life I couldn't handle, and having a relationship, not even just a romantic relationship, but having a relationship with someone who is gay wasn't on my list of things, right? And when I did that, I threw up some walls, and I threw up walls against loving people for who they are. And I found that even when I got to the point where I wanted to tear down those walls, I didn't know the path to take to do it. And it was only when I relied on my Savior and let the atonement, change me, that I was able to bring that wall down and really love Chad for who he was, and to accept him as a person, but also, romantically, and as someone I could spend my life with. And I think that's, one of the biggest things I've learned is that, the atonement can help change you when you don't know the path yourself to change, that he will, that the Savior will guide you and bring you to where you need to be, so that you can love that person for who they are. One question is just terminology, really.
Mm-hmm.
Like people who are curious, they want to know how to talk about it, but they don't know how to do it without necessarily offending someone.
Yeah.
And so,
like do I use the term SSA or gay?
Okay, yeah. And so they have a lot of questions. They want to talk about it, but they don't have the words to talk about it. And so that's one of the questions.
That's one of the questions. Another one that I've always had is, well, are you sure you're not bi? And I'm like, well, what do I need to prove to you that I'm not? But that's usually a difficult one to answer. But I tell them that I pretty much know I'm gay. You'll have to take my word for it. One of the biggest parts, I think, is that, well, any marriage isn't exclusively physical. That's a part of the marriage. And so even if you're worried about that part of your marriage, and I was very worried, Jenni was very worried, you can always work on all parts of that relationship. Jenni and I spend a lot of time becoming emotionally close, right? And learning more about each other's lives. You can always work on any part of a relationship. When it does come time, when you're married or when you're talking about the physical part of the relationship, it can be difficult. It was. Our honeymoon, for instance, was very was very hard, very exploratory, I guess. But all I can say is that it took some time to work on, but it works, and we have a very fulfilling physical relationship from someone who has had a relationship with a guy. I can tell you it's different. It's definitely different, but it is something that is fulfilling. I feel very close to Jenni, and I love her, and she feels that too. We don't go away from a sexual encounter feeling like, well, that didn't work. So, but we love each other, and I feel like we've been able to become close physically, emotionally, goal-wise, in all aspects of our relationship. We've been able to become closer to each other. I think part of that as well, of course, is the spiritual aspect. We've always tried to develop that as well, to make sure that God is in our relationship. Yeah.
I definitely feel that my needs are being met in this relationship. You know, I had a lot of concerns before getting married, but it's turned out far and beyond better than anything I could have imagined. And I love, you know, being married to Chad, and he fulfills me emotionally and physically, and I couldn't imagine a better marriage for someone who was very concerned about what my marriage life would look like. It's been amazing, and I'm very happy, and I honestly couldn't imagine it being any better. So, yeah.
I think the most important part is being able to talk about my experience as being gay. That just writing our blog post was a huge step, like just being able to talk about it and not be like something I'm ashamed of or that I have to hide. That's a constant thing that's been that Jenni and I would be able to talk about it with ourselves, but if we tried to, sometimes if we mentioned it to Jenni's family or my family, it would just be kind of an awkward moment and then let's move on. But being in North Star, being in my church, being in the church, being in my family, anytime when I'm able to talk about it and to be able to have it be to feel like my experiences are legitimate is so important. I want to, like I said, my conversion and my experience with being gay are so intertwined. Like my testimony has been so strengthened through this experience. Why can I not talk about it? Why can I not tell you about this awesome experience that I'm having? I think we should be able to, in a church setting, be able to talk about this. I should be able to say it in my testimony, and not feel like someone's gonna leave because they think it's inappropriate.
You know, we have already seen some good things doing this Voices of Hope. My dad called me today, and he knew we were coming down here to do this, and he called me and he said, you know, we decided today to, as part of our gospel study, to watch a couple of videos. They watched a couple of videos from the Mormons and Gays website. And my dad asked me a few questions about, you know, terminology and things. And then he said, you know, you and Chad are going to have to help us understand this a little bit better, because, you know, we don't understand. We don't really know anyone, you know, besides you and Chad, you know, who have experienced this. And we watching those videos, it kind of opened their eyes, and and my dad said to me, you know, we want to learn more, and we want to understand this better, and can you help us to understand it better? And I think that, you know, that starts to build that open dialogue with not just your family, but hopefully eventually you can have it, you know, at church and with leaders, and have that open dialogue, so that people who experience same-sex attraction and other things can get the help that they need, and that there are a lot of people who experience this that they don't know where to turn for help, and the more open we are about it, the more that those people can be helped and receive support for what they're going through.